Charlie Kirk, he loved history. He devoured the ideas that formed the foundation of our civilization. He stood for a tradition that Socrates established 2,500 years ago to question, to search, and to teach. He was Athens and Jerusalem, the city of reason and the city of God in one person.
What if I told you that a Bronze Age philosopher and a Gen Z conservative influencer are having the same argument, just 2,500 years apart? Picture this. Charlie Kirk walks into Plato's Academy. The students stop mid-debate. Someone whispers, "Is that a MAGA hat?" Meanwhile, Socrates squints and asks the only question that matters. "Young man, what do you mean by winning?" This isn't fantasy. It's happening right now, in every political tweet, every campus protest, every family dinner that goes sideways. Because when Kansas meets Corinth, when Turning Point USA collides with ancient Athens, something explosive happens. Not left versus right, but eternal versus temporal, wisdom versus information, the soul versus the algorithm. Buckle up. We're about to find out why your Twitter arguments were already settled in 400 BC. Here's the thing nobody tells you about freedom. The freest man in history lived in a barrel. Charlie Kirk says, "Freedom is not doing what you want, but doing what is right." Diogenes, eating scraps in the Athenian marketplace, would have laughed and said, "Finally, someone gets it." When Alexander the Great offered him anything in the world, Diogenes asked him to stop blocking the sun. That's freedom, needing so little that even emperors can't tempt you. But here's the twist that'll break your brain. Neuroscience in 2025 proves what the Stoics knew in 100 AD. Your prefrontal cortex, the freedom center, literally grows stronger through restriction. Every time you say no to doom scrolling, you're building what Epictetus called the inner citadel. Kirk's self-reliance isn't solo. It's Seneca's discipline meeting Paul's self-control. Last week, a Stanford study showed that people with regular constraints report 40% higher life satisfaction than those with unlimited choices. The ancients called it Sophrosine, self-mastery. We call it putting your phone in another room. Freedom isn't the absence of chains, it's choosing the right ones. Quick question, would Aristotle invest in crypto? Charlie Kirk insists. Government does not create wealth, it merely redistributes it. The Athenian silver mines and Roman trade routes agree, but with a massive asterisk that changes everything. Here's a story. A Corinthian merchant gets stupidly rich, selling purple dye. But instead of buying a yacht, or whatever the 5th century BC equivalent was, he builds a public gymnasium. Why? Because in the Mediterranean world, wealth without civic virtue was considered a kind of poverty. Your gold meant nothing if your polis thought you were trash. Flash forward to September 2025. Sam Bankman-Fried's jury just heard how FTX collapsed not from bad math, but from forgetting this ancient rule. Markets without morals eat themselves. The Romans had a word, peculium, wealth that corrupts its owner. When Kirk says material wealth doesn't equal happiness, he's channeling Marcus Aurelius, who ran an empire but slept on the floor. The punchline? Free markets work precisely because they're not free. They're bound by trust, reputation, and what Adam Smith, before he wrote about economics, called moral sentiments. Markets are engines. Virtues are the steering wheel. Guess what happens when you floor it without steering? Plot twist, the most banned teacher in history never wrote a single word. Charlie Kirk warns that schools have become indoctrination centers. Socrates got executed for essentially the same complaint, corrupting youth by teaching them to think. The only difference? Athens used hemlock. We use standardized tests. Here's what's wild. MIT just released a study showing that students who learn through Socratic questioning score 47% higher on critical thinking than those who memorize answers. Yet we're still teaching kids to fill bubbles while AI can already pass the bar exam. The Mediterranean secret? Paideia, education as soul formation, not information download. When monasteries preserved classical texts through the Dark Ages, they weren't just copying words. They were maintaining what Augustine called laboratories of the spirit, places where questions matter more than answers. Last month, a viral TikTok showed a professor asking students to argue against their own beliefs. Comment section, absolute meltdown. Plato's Academy, just another Tuesday. Because real education doesn't confirm what you know, it destroys what you think you know. Kirk's right about indoctrination. But the cure isn't newer answers, it's older questions. Here's a brain breaker. The most traditional thing you can do is change. Charlie Kirk champions principles that have stood the test of time. But Augustus literally invented traditions to save Rome. He made up ancient ceremonies that never existed, and they worked because people needed the story more than the history. September 2025. Headline: Gen Z rediscovers religion through psychedelics and Marcus Aurelius. They're not returning to church, they're creating hybrid traditions, mixing Stoic journaling with mystical experiences. The ancients would totally get this. Mystery cults updated their rituals constantly while claiming eternal origins. The Roman concept of mos maiorum, ancestral custom, was never about freezing time. It was about choosing which parts of the past deserve a future, like when Constantine legalized Christianity not to preserve tradition, but to transform it. Think about marriage. Kirk defends traditional marriage, but Roman marriage evolved from purchasing wives to consensual partnership over centuries. The tradition survived by adapting. The couples who stayed together weren't the most traditional. They were the most creative within tradition. Tradition isn't a museum, it's a garden. Keep what grows, compost what doesn't. The ultimate paradox: the most powerful people in history all gave up their power, and that's exactly how they kept it. Charlie Kirk says self-reliance is the source of success, while dependence leads to mediocrity. But here's what nobody mentions. Cincinnatus offered absolute power over Rome, literally went back to farming. Washington did the same thing 2,000 years later. They understood what Kirk's critics miss. True self-reliance means knowing when to rely on others. Here's the Mindbender, September 2025. Neuroscience from Johns Hopkins just proved what the Stoics intuited. Your brain's default mode network, which creates your sense of self, actually strengthens through selective surrender. When you admit ignorance, delegate authority, or accept help, your neural pathways for leadership literally expand. Story time. Optimus Princeps, Trajan, wrote in his journal, "I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others." The emperor admitted he needed his slaves to dress him, his generals to win battles, his wife to keep him human. Last week, a leaked email showed a Fortune 500 CEO asking their intern for advice on TikTok strategy. The internet mocked them. Augustine would have promoted them. Because admitting ignorance isn't weakness, it's the highest form of strength. Kirk champions individual power, but even Jesus washed feet. Even Achilles needed Patroclus. Even Atlas asked Hercules to hold the sky for a minute. Your independence is an interdependence in denial. Final question. If Aristotle had a YouTube channel, would you subscribe? Here's what this journey reveals. Charlie Kirk and the ancients are having the same fight, not against each other, but against forgetting what makes us human. When Kirk says freedom requires virtue, markets need morals, education needs wisdom, he's not being conservative, he's being timeless. The real culture war isn't left versus right, It's the eternal wrestling with the ephemeral, wisdom grappling with virality, the soul fighting the feed. Epicurus spent his mornings journaling about death. You spend yours checking notifications about nothing. But here's the hope. Every generation thinks they're the first to face these questions. The Athenians worried their kids were soft. Romans panicked about moral decline. Medieval monks thought books would ruin memory. Yet somehow, the best ideas survived, evolved, and found new voices. You want to know the secret? Stop asking what's trending. Start asking what's true. Because in 2,000 years, someone will scroll through the digital ruins of our civilization, and the only content that will matter is what connected us to something bigger than ourselves. The ancients are calling. Will you pick up? Subscribe. Drop a comment. Which ancient voice speaks loudest to your modern struggles? How about next episode? In today's perplexing social climate, would it be more meaningful to emulate Zeno or Diogenes? Stay curious, stay eternal,